Shalom Aleichem and good evening to everybody. I am about 20 minutes late and I apologize. Welcome to this, I don't know what word you want to use, expanded, extended, enhanced series of classes from what is really the organization-based Medrash L'Noshma Bonis 770, which are under the auspices of Rebbetzin Ariella Ben Chiyun, who has been Mesa Nefesh for these classes forever. More than 30 years. Normally I would teach in 770, in which case I would teach only in the morning. But since I'm on Zoom, and you're on Zoom, I figure, so I gave 2 classes in Maamar yesterday. Today I didn't give 2 classes in Maamar because I had Machon L'Yahadus, Siddur, which I enjoyed, and they also were broadcast on these mediums. They were broadcast live on Inside Hasidus, and then they were, of course, preserved on the Facebook page of Inside Hasidus, and as far as I know, also on the YouTube page of Inside Hasidus. They're preserved. And now we're learning another Maamar, Basukos Tashvu. Okay, I made a mistake. Okay, I labeled it Ulkachtam Lachem. I made a mistake. I labeled it Ulkachtam Lachem. If you go to the... by the way, anybody who's a member of my broadcast group that I send out all my classes, I send you the PDF of this Maamar. I called it Ulkachtem. It's a mistake. It should be Basukos Tashvu. And if you belong to Facebook, I actually put up on the Facebook page this Maamar, but I erroneously called it Ulkachtem Lachem by Yom. The Maamar is Basukos Tashvu. I'll fix it, but I can't fix it now because right now I got to teach. This Maamar is 14 pages long, as you can see. This Maamar was said the evening before Sukkot, which meant that the next night we would sit in the Sukkah, and the night before the Rebbe made a fabring. This is the end of the day of the Yortzeit, of the anniversary of the Histalkus of the Rebbe Marash, who passed away in the year Tafresh Mem Gimel, 1882. And as it was explained to me by people who know and understand, that from the time that there was a hookup available, that the Rebbe was being broadcast live all over the world, the Rebbe fabringed the eve of every Yom Tov. Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Sukkot, Erev Pesach was of course the Yud Nissen fabringen, and then Erev Shavuos would be a fabringen. Usually in this fabringen there would be a Maamar, what's called a Maamar Mamish, a Maamar with a nigun, with a tune that the Rebbe would say. And it was sort of the Rebbe's projecting the Yom Tov through Torah, Kedarkei B'Kodesh, to the world, to the ganze Welt. And this started around 1970 or 71, Lamed Alf. This is Lamed Ches, this is 1977. And of course we have the good fortune of learning these Maimorim. So the eve of Sukkot, the night before Sukkot, there was a Fabring, and the Rebbe said what looks to me to be a very long Maimon. The Maimon is edited, it's 14 pages. 14 pages. If it's 5 minutes a page, that's 70 minutes of talking. Probably less than 70 minutes of talking, but it was a rather long Maamar. Now, the thing about this Maamar, which is most outstanding, so to speak, from the history of Lubavitch, is that the Rebbe did not have a habit of editing his Maimorim. This Maamar the Rebbe chose to edit in 1977 at the time. When did he complete the editing? On Hoshana Rabbah. Literally hours before the infamous heart attack that took place during Hakofis on Shmini Atzeres, the Rebbe edited this Maamar, Basukos Tashvu Shivas Yamim. So for people who were around at that time, particularly people who were then Bochrim, I heard this from a Bocher. He's older than I am now, but he was one of the Yungalite who worked on the Maamar at the time. When this Maamar was prepared and the Rebbe edited it, and he edited it a second time, and then hours later the Rebbe had a heart attack, from which, of course, he would recover most miraculously. Hasidim saw in this Maamar something more than just an ordinary Maamar. And as I'm saying to you, I heard from one of the people who worked on the Maamar that the Rebbe had a custom that he would edit the Maamar twice. It was called Hagah Shniya. He would edit the Maamar. They would send in a Maamar in typed up, written out with footnotes, and the Rebbe would work on it, work hard on it, make all kinds of corrections, add additional footnotes and sources, and that was all typed up. Then it would be typed up in typeset, and the Rebbe would get it for a second run. As a rule, the second edition was kind of minor. He didn't do much correction, except maybe typographical errors and things of this sort. Things that were overlooked in the first time around. In this Maimer, the Rebbe added footnote 74. In this printed footnote 74. In the old Maimorim, it's a footnote with a star. It's an additional. You could see that it was an additional footnote. What does it say? Yesh leimer al shem leiv chacham liyamine. The Rebbe is discussing in the pnim of the Maimer that a chacham niked, that a person who's considered a chacham is identified not just by his learning and by his davening, but by his parochial activities, his eating and his drinking and his walking and his talking and his sleeping and his dressing and his interacting with people and his strolling around. So on this Rambam, which the Rebbe brings in the pnim of the Maimer, that a chacham niked b'achelasei b'sheyasei b'tiyulei, he brings in the ha'ara yesh leimer al terach leiv chacham limin. And the connection would be that if you're a chacham, you eat different than everybody else, almost like a byproduct by itself. If you're a chacham, not a Talmud chacham, a chacham, your eating is different automatically. If you're a chacham, your teal, the way you stroll, the way you wander the streets, is also different automatically. Al derech, it says in Tanya, leiv chacham liyamin, that the yetzetev, navshalakis, is on the right side of the heart. What do we know about the right side of the heart? That it doesn't have any blood in it, which represents a quiet, a quiescence, a depth. And the Rebbe is correlating the idea that a chacham has certain characteristics that are superficial, that are symptomatic of who he is inside, to what it says in Tanya about leiv. And of course, hours after the Rebbe wrote these words, the Rebbe had that massive heart attack, lo yaleinu. And it was a clear inyan of Ruach HaKodesh, where the Rebbe was talking about the inyan of leiv. In other words, this footnote was not necessary. It doesn't add anything to the Maimer, and its relationship to the Pnim is indirect. The Rebbe made a point of adding it. Again, the Rebbe didn't tell this to me, but this I heard from someone who worked on the Hanocha, because it was an allusion to what would happen a few hours later on. What is the Maimer about? The Maimer really journeys through all of Tishrei, even Elul. Rosh Hashanah, Seres Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, then the Sukkah, then the Daled Minim, and then Simchas Beis HaSheyeva. All of these ideas are touched on. But the Maimer has a soul. The Maimer has an akudah. The Maimer has a pnimius, a soul. I'm going to mention this now. And b'li neder, tomorrow morning, my class is scheduled officially for 10:30. Tomorrow's Thursday. B'li neder, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, I'm going to explore what I'm about to say now in a few words in tomorrow morning's introduction in a more comprehensive way. I suppose you could say I'm planning to give 3 classes on this Maimer. Tonight's class is not going to be particularly hard. Tomorrow morning's class is the scholarly one, is the hard one. And we'll see how the Eibishter will give us Hatzlacha B'Zman and Hatzlacha B'Limud and Hatzlacha B'Iyun. The point of this Maimer is that there's this classic concept called Oshon, Ayin Shin Nun. Oshon is an abbreviation for Olam Shana Nefesh. Time, space, life. All of reality consists of these 3 principles. Everything that exists is living, it occupies time, and it occupies space and travels through time. Oshon. The Tzemach Tzedek brings, the Rebbe brings it in the Maimer, but there's a lot of footnotes missing in this Maimer. I'm realizing now it's a Mugadik Maimer. That the Tzemach Tzedek writes that all of Nivne Kol Sefer Yetzirah, that Al Gimel Bechinas Oshon, on these 3 ideas of Eilam Shana and Nefesh, the entire Sefer Yetzirah is constructed. If you will, the Sefer Yetzirah speaks about everything in Kabbalah in 3s. You have Eish, Mayim, and Ruach, or as he calls it, Emesh, Aver, Mayim, Eish. And then you have Sefer Sfar and Sipur, and Ksav, Kesef, and Michtav. Everything in Sefer Yetzirah goes in 3s. There's other Kabbalah where everything goes in 4, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And of course in our Kabbalah everything goes in 5, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida, or Yud Kei Vav Kei and Kei Tzei Shel Yud. But in the Sefer Yetzirah everything goes in 3s. And there's discussions about this which I'm going to leave for tomorrow morning. So the Sefer Yetzirah says that everything goes in 3s. The Tzemach Tzedek writes that the whole Sefer Yetzirah is constructed around the number 3. And really, it's Olam Shana Nefesh. Time, it's life, which is the deepest thing. Time, which is the second deepest thing. And space, which is the lowest inyan. Api Pnimiyas HaTorah, that's the way they work out. And then there's the concept called Achas. Achas goes on the Eibishter, or on Yechida. And you have Achas Benefesh is the Kohen Gadol. Achas Bizman is Yom Kippur. And Achas B'mokim is the Kedesh HaKadoshim. And then the Rebbe is going to apply that principle of Achas to Sukkot as well. Ru'uyim Kol Yisrael Leishe B'Sukkah Achas. And Achas is a fourth idea. You have life, time, space, and how into life you bring the Yechida of life, into time you bring the Yechida of time, into space you bring the Yechida of space, and basically this is Yom Kippur, which is flanked, which is preceded by Rosh Hashanah, Seder Yemei Tshuva, and then it spills over into Sukkot, and the argument of the Rebbe is that on Sukkot, the Achas is revealed. By Kesel Yom Chagenu, the Achas is actually revealed. On Sukkot, on Rosh Hashanah, it's concealed. Even on Yom Kippur, it's concealed. On Sukkot, the Achas is revealed in Oshan, and Elam Shara Nefesh, in all three aspects. That's what this Maimed is about. It's very, very long because he goes into many of the details of Rosh Hashanah, especially the details of Yom Kippur, and then the details of the Sukkah. There's a lot of discussion on the Sukkah, and then there's a considerable amount of discussion on the Daled Minim, and there's also a little bit of a discussion on Simchas Beis HaSheyeva. And in each case, the way it's going to break down, but Klolos is that you have Oshan, Olam Shana Nefesh, and that the Pnimius of Oshan is Achas, is Yechida, and the point is that the Achas should be revealed in the world, in the Osher, or the Elam Shara Nefesh. It shouldn't just remain hidden. That's the point of the Maimed. That's the point of the Maimed. Okay? Today we're going to learn essentially the questions. That's what we're going to learn. Today my plan is to learn page Lamed, Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel, and the first half of Lamed Aleph. I divided the Maimed into three, and if you downloaded the PDF either from Facebook or from the WhatsApp groups that I delivered it to, you'll see that I actually put lines into the Maimed. I put 1, 2, 3. On page Lamed Al you have number 2, and on page Lamed Ches I put number 3. My plan is to teach it in 3 classes. Whether those plans materialize depends on the Eibishter and my koyach, and whether my judgment of how to divide the Maimed was accurate or not. Okay? So we're going to start. I'm not going to waste any more time. I just spent about 10 minutes, 12 minutes introducing the Maimed, and we're going to get to the Maimed itself. And a good portion of today's class is of course the questions. So here we go. It's a mitzvah deraisa that a Yid is instructed for 7 days he had to sit in the sukkah. And then it says, Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkah. The word ezrach technically means every citizen. But ezrach is in the word shine, like maskel heisen ezrachi. Every citizen of Israel will sit in a sukkah. Now, of course, there's 100 Maimorim on this pasuk. 100 is a guzma, but you get my point. It's a literal redundancy. It's twice the same exact words. B'sukkah Tashvu Shivas Yamim is once, called ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkah is twice. The difference is only the first time it's a command, and the second time it's a statement of fact, it's a prediction. And there's much in Chassidus about why. Our Maimed is going to say that Basukos Tashvu Shivas Yamim is now, Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshu b'sukkah is primarily after Mashiach comes, as you'll see later on. And we're going to the text, the Yaduim, the Yuk, and I was saying this Yerubas, that we all know the questions about this pasuk. The Tzadach Lahavin, question number 1 is Ma'al Keifel Advarim, why is this written twice? That La'ach Reisha Kvar Mitzaveh. B'Sukkos Tashvu Shivas Yamim, once there's an instruction that people have to sit in the sukkah for 7 days. Skip the bracket. Mam Meisafed Ba'omri Kol Ezrach B'Yisrael Yeshu B'Sukkos. Why does it say a second time that every Ezrach, every citizen of Israel sits in the sukkah? That's question number 1. Question number 2. Gam Tzadach Lahavin. There's a question be'etzem in your mitzvah sukkah, not in the wording of the pasuk, in the way the commandment is introduced, but in the mitzvah itself. To analyze the mitzvah of sitting in a sukkah. If you examine the sitting in the sukkah, you see a mutual exclusion, a contradiction. The yeshiva b'sukkah tzarich liyas teishvu kein taduru. You're supposed to sit in the sukkah like you live in your house. Like it says in Gemara, and it says in Rambam, the chol shivas hayam, all 7 days. You make your sukkah primary and your home secondary. Remember, halachically you have to even sleep in the sukkah. Now we don't for whatever reasons, but the inyan of sukkah says that your whole life is in the sukkah. Just like all year long, your home is your permanent place. She'esa b'kol yanav, where you do all of your things, including your very private things. That's how you're supposed to sleep in the sukkah. Shasa kol yanav sukkah. Everything has to be done in the sukkah. V'yire or v'yare, it has to be seen. Shasukkah he dirasei makam kviyusei, that this sukkah is his home and place of permanence. B'meshach shivas yom eila, for these 7 days. So the sukkah is designed. The word teshvu, to sit, is interpreted in the Gemara. Teshvu keitaduri, you should sit in the sukkah the way you live in your home. At the same time, the sukkah is designed to be a temporary dwelling. This sukkah that you're supposed to live in a way that's permanent is designed to be a non-permanent structure. And he brings an eye from the Gemara. This idea the sukkah is supposed to be a temporary type of building. Just one of the conditions of the mitzvah. And he brings the lashon the din is, if a sukkah is more than a certain height, it's puzzle. And one of the reasons that's brought for why if a sukkah is more than a certain height, it's puzzle, is because if you build a building that's too large, you have to build it on a very sturdy material, out of metal. The sukkah has to be small enough that you could build it out of less than sturdy material. And the halacha would say that even if you built it out of the most sturdy material, because it's small enough to be built out of material which is less than sturdy, it's kosher for a sukkah. So the Gemara says that one of the reasons sukkah shel gavei l'malam esmam psula, if the sukkah is above 20 cubits, it's not kosher. Besides, for the other reasons in the Gemara, is because then it becomes like a house, and it's not supposed to be a house; it's supposed to be a hut. So the Rebbe says there's a mutual exclusion there. There's a contradiction. Teishu kein taduru in a binyan aray. You're supposed to live permanently in what amounts to a temporary dwelling. Now, I want you to know that the Rebbe doesn't really answer this question directly. I think he answers the question indirectly, but he doesn't answer the question directly. The way the Rebbe answers the question indirectly is by saying that Sukkot is not life. Sukkot is an introduction to life. What happens after Sukkot, the regular living, what we would call in our culture, the V'yankev Holach Adarke, that's life. And that's how it seems to me. But the Rebbe doesn't really answer this question directly. Now, go to 6 lines from the bottom of page Lamed. V'hine. There's something else about Sukkah which deserves our analysis. And this point that the Rebbe makes now, I don't understand the diuk. The Rebbe says it for reasons that you'll understand later. But what the Rebbe is saying is very hard to understand. And that is, mitzvah Sukkah is first of all mitzvah aseh shazman grama. Sukkah is connected to time, obviously, right? Because if you sit in the Sukkah in the middle of Teves, you're not Makayim. The mitzvah has to be from Tezvov Tishrei until Chav Aleph or Chav Tishrei and no more. But v'neisef al zeh mitzvah Sukkah magbelas hazman, it's magbelas gam magbelas hamokim. The Sukkah is limited in place. How so? Shetzarach liyas mokim muchshel asiyas haSukkah, that the place he built the Sukkah is not allowed to have anything covering it on top, because the eitzes sukkah tachas is possible. So you can't build a Sukkah any place. You can only build a Sukkah over the open sky. And the Rebbe wants to argue that that's called mokim. Even though if you cut the tree down, that very same space becomes appropriate for the building of a sukkah, but so long as the tree is standing there, that space, not the tree, that space is not fit for sukkah. I don't understand how this is called mokim, but this is what the Rebbe is trying to argue. What the Rebbe is trying to argue, as I told you in my introduction, is that just like Yom Kippur is defined by Oshon, Olam Shana Nefesh, and then bringing Achas into Olam Shana Nefesh, the Rebbe wants to argue that the sukkah is also Oshon. Olam Shana Nefesh and Ru'uyim Kol Yisrael Leisha B'Sukkah Achas, bring Achas into the Oshon. How is he arguing it? By saying that there's something timely about Sukkah, and there's also something spatially precise about Sukkah, which is that you can only build it in certain areas of Mokum. And then, of course, Nefesh, you have to sit called Ezech B'Yisrael Yeshu B'Sukkahs. So I know why the Rebbe is making this diuk, but I don't understand the diuk, because there's no you can build a sukkah any place. If there's a tree, you cut it down. So it's not the place, it's the tree. But the Rebbe is arguing that it's the mokum. And if you look at the end of the page, the Rebbe says, Mash'ein kein b'shar Yom Tov. Look at any other Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuos. Most other Yom Tov, we do know that they have to be done at a certain time. There's no limitation about space. The Rebbe wants to argue that by Sukkah, there's not only Zman, but also Mokum. And ultimately, he wants to argue that there's not only Zman and Mokum, there's also Nefesh. Eilam, Shana, Nefesh, Ashan. Just like Yom Kippur. So, let the kasha be a kasha, and we're going to move on. So the Rebbe has 3 observations. Number 1, why is it written twice? Number 2, how could the sukkah be permanent and not permanent? It's dafke teishu kein taduru, and it's dafke binyan aray. And number 3, why is sukkah connected to time and to space? And again, I'm putting now words into the Maamar, which will become clear as the Maamar progresses, and the soul, life, the neshama of a yid. Page Lamed Aleph. Behine. Once we understand the inyan of sitting in the sukkah and the mitzvahs associated with sitting in the sukkah, mitzvahs until as daled min, and then comes the mitzvah of the 4 species. Like it says in the pasuk, on the first day you have to take pri eitz hadar, which means an esrik, kapes tmarim, which means a lulav, anaf eitz avis, which means hadasim, and arve nachal, which means araves. And the Rebbe says in the bracket, mitzvah yeshiva sukkah, the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah is mireg harishin shabbos chalul shabbos me'asukkos. It begins in the evening, the moment the sun sets on Erev Sukkos, and Sukkos enters, and to sit in the sukkah. Well, I'm skipping the parentheses. After that, in the morning, it's a second mitzvah in sukkahs, the mitzvah of daled minim. Which indicates further, there's a connection between the 4 kinds and the mitzvah of sukkah. Especially, it says brought in Siddur, based on Kabbalah. It's choicest, it's best. Then when you make the bracha daled minim, we do it in the morning before davening. A lot of Yidden do it in shul before halal, but it's apropos, it's most precise to go into the sukkah and make the bracha on the lulav. Which underscores further kesha, the association between mitzvahs netilas daled min, and the mitzvah of taking these 4 kinds, the mitzvah sukkah and the mitzvah sukkah itself. Now, api nigle and api pasha, the connection is very similar. Sukkah is about parnasa. The building of the sukkah is made from Seilel Geden V'Yekov. When you harvest a crop of fruit or of grain or of legumes, there's the byproducts, there's husks, there's branches, there's waste. From that waste you make a sukkah. And the daled minim are, of course, 4 species which are associated with food directly or indirectly. So the connection between the sukkah and the lulav is obvious. They're both about parnasa. But in pnimiyas ha'inyanim, they're 2 separate things. But the minig is to shake the lulav in the sukkah, like it's explained in Chassidus, you bring it to your heart. That the makaf, the envelope, the encompassing environment of the sukkah is brought to the person's heart when he shakes the daled minim. And you'll see this in Mitzvah Hashem in this Maamar at length. How are these 2 mitzvahs connected? Now the Rebbe compounds the question. They're very, very different. How so? Mitzvah sukkah is shivas yom. Sukkah is 7 days. Mashenkim is until daled minim ikira mitzvahs b'yem rishon. People don't even know this, but min ha'Torah, you have to shake the lulav only once. The first day. Pardon me. Shaking the lulav for 7 days is only in the Beis HaMikdash. But begvulin, you shake it only 1 day. So why do we have it for 7 days? So the Rebbe says, Rabbi Mezaki is the one who said you should shake the lulav for 7 days. But sitting in the sukkah is the same the first day and the last day. Shaking the lulav is very different the first day than the other days, because you have to have lachem. And let me just observe that this year the first day is Shabbos, so we're not going to shake the lulav the first day, which means that halachically the whole lulav this year is less strict than other years, because on the second day there's no lachem. We're medaktik, we say matana menas lahachzir all the 7 days, but the chiyuv of lachem is only the first day, and this year there is no first day. So there's a very big difference between the lulav and the sukkah, even nowadays that we shake the lulav for 7 days as well. So the first question is, what's the connection between the sukkah and the lulav? They seem to be so different. V'hine, I'm now 7 lines from the end of the paragraph on page Lamed Aleph. And amongst these 4 kinds, the question is, why were these 4 kinds chosen? And of course, you understand, these 4 kinds are based on psukim. And it's originally halach l'meisha misina. Meisha Rabbeinu was told by Kadosh Baruch Hu what's an esrig, and the Yidden figured out that it's called Pri Eitz Hadar in the Chumash. Hashem told Meisha Rabbeinu what's a lulav, and Yidden figured out that it's called in the Chumash kapis tmarim. Hashem showed Meisha Rabbeinu what's a hodas, and Yidden understood that this is called anafei tzavis. Hashem showed Meisha Rabbeinu what's an arav, and Yidden understood this is called arvei nachal. The source of what I just told you is the Akdama, is from the Akdama of Pirush Mishnayos Rambam on Shas. Okay, but why these four kinds? They all grow, but there's so many others. Be specific kinds. Moreover, all of them have to be beautiful. That even though it says Pri Eitz Hadar, only by the Esrig it says Hadar, but from the Esrig's Hadar we learn that all the four minim have to be, what's the word in American? Expensive, tired. You could spend $10 on one Hadas. You can spend, you want to use 6 Hadassim, like the Rebbe says to do, you have to use $60. How do I know? Because that's what it cost me. You can spend so much money on these mitzvahs, you have no idea. Because all of the Dalad minim have to be Hadar. So of course, the Rebbe wants to understand the Sukkah, the Rebbe wants to understand the Dalad minim, and the Rebbe wants to understand the connections between the two. Perek Gimel, bottom of Lamed Al, Vehine. Neis about Yukamanal, the questions we asked in Perek Aleph of this Maimer, in Perek Beis of this Maimer, which are an analysis of the biblical texts, and the analysis of the mitzvah in theory. Yedua Masham Marzal, there's the practical side of it all. It says in Chazal, no mitzvahs li Yisro. Every mitzvah is there to heal us, to correct us, to make us better. In other words, every mitzvah has a roh and aveidas ha'odam. It teaches us how to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The neis of mitzvah. First of all, there's the mitzvah which is in Yon. Hashem separated us from the rest of the world. He made us His because of the mitzvahs, and He commanded us to do kach v'kach. And therefore, we do mitzvahs. God said that's enough of a reason. There's also the idea of mitzvahs affecting us. Neisef lazeh, second line from the bottom page. Lamed Aleph, yesh b'ha mitzvah. Each mitzvah has avodah miyuchedes, a specific work, labor, u'p'ul, and a certain effect. B'negeh la'avodah sa'adla b'chala, by the person's working on himself. Mitzvahs refine me. Ukmeikein hu ba'avodas, turn to page Lamed Beis. Yisrael b'chag Sukkos. The same is true. Each of the mitzvahs of Sukkos, besides for the fact that Hashem said to do them, and besides for the fact that they may have all kinds of mystical and metaphysical significances and meanings, there is also the fundamental and basic idea that when I do what God says, it makes me into a better person. Hein ba'mitzvah de Sukkos Tashvu, hein b'negeh l'mitzvah de lakachtam lachem, and here the Rebbe says, hein b'negeh l'mitzvah mechaz beis hasheva, shebekulam yesh inyonim, u'pu'ulasam ba'avodah. Each one of these three, the Sukkah, the Lulav, and the Simchas, beis hasheva, and the tzara be'emes habriyos. And of course, the Rebbe has a sikha where the Rebbe says that in Sukkot you have 3 Simchas. You have the Simcha of Yom Tov, v'samachta b'chagecha. You have the Simcha of the Dalad Minim, v'smachta b'fnei Hashem l'kechem shivas yamim. And you have the Simcha beis hasheva, which is minig neviim. It's not in the Chumash. So the Rebbe is asking, what is the message practically? In other words, how do these mitzvahs improve me as a human being? Now, I don't know where later in the Maimon the Rebbe goes back to Shmini Atzeres. He doesn't really do it. He does talk about the transition from Tishrei to the whole year, but I don't recall him going back to Shmini Atzeres later in the Maimon. That Afa B'Shmini Regel B'Fnei Yasper, the Gemara says Shmini Atzeres is considered the 4th regel, right? It's Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef. Shmini is called the 8th day, which means there's a connection to the 7 days before. You say them is that moreover, skip the parenthesis, just like in numbers, and in moments, and in days. You can't have 8 without 7 before it. You can't have Shmini Atzeres without first having Sukkah. That even though even though it's a separate service, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah separate from Sukkahs, and they happen after Sukkahs, not at the same time. The only way we're able to reach the level where we can even do the Aveidah of Shmini Atzeres is because first you have Sukkahs. And since you can't have the Aveidah of Shmini Atzeres without having Sukkahs, Sukkahs not only precedes Shmini Atzeres, it sets it up. It makes it possible. So therefore the Rebbe says, just like we have to understand the Aveidah, what he's calling in this Maimer, when it comes to the Sukkah and the Lulav and the Simchas Beis HaShieva, you have to understand the Litzad Be'emes Abrius. We can get to the Shmini Atzeres. And I have to tell you this. I learned of a Koch of the Rebbe Maharash. I actually learned it twice. And this sounds so like the Vakocha. The Vakocha has a section where he analyzes all the Yomim Tevim of Tishrei, beginning with Elul, very elaborately, very big, Grace Harichas. And the Rebbe, of course, quotes the Vakocha. The whole Nesius of the Rebbe, when it comes to Tishrei, is quoting the Vakocha. It's like almost every year. And the Vakocha also speaks about these four ideas: Sukkah, Lulav, Simchas Beis HaShieva, and then Shmini Atzeres. And I suspect that this is why the Rebbe is mentioning it, but he doesn't go back to it later in the Maamar, because the Rebbe is going to distill it. The Rebbe is going to boil down the whole inyan, not to the various different ideas, but to the spirit of the various different ideas, which I already told you. It's the concept of Oshon, and how you bring Achas into Oshon. So these are questions. And there's basically three questions. What's the Sukkah, what's the Lulav, and what's the Avodah? And now the Rebbe begins the answer in Perek Dalet. And like I said, today is the easy part. Tomorrow morning, with Hashem's help, is going to be the part of the Maamar that's going to require the maximum work on our part. Obi, the pshat is, the Hinix, if the Pasuk says, Bakesa liyem chageinu, that Tishrei is a month, which of course is called Muspa Bakel. It's satiated, it's sated with all good things. It's a Chodesh Klali, a general month where everything that's going to happen a whole year exists on a level of Klal. Kabbalah Seil, and Tshuva, and Simcha, and Achdus, everything on a level of Klal. Yeah? But it's broken down into sections. The beginning of the month is called Bakesa. You have all these deep and basic in Yom Avodas Hashem, the way they're concealed, hidden. And then you have Liyem Chagena, where it's all revealed. Which is why you find by the Rabbeim that they say about Rosh Hashanah and Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah and Beklal about Aseres Yemei Tshuva and Sukkos, that all of the Echid ideas associated with Aseres Yemei Tshuva Beklal and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur Befrat are available in Sukkos and in Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah Befrat Bekava Simcha. In other words, it's the same intensity, but in the Yom Neroyim it's an intensity of Moira, and in Sukkos and Simchas Torah it's an intensity in an expression of Simcha, but it's the same. And it's called Bakeseh. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we experience this Yechida intensity on a level which you can't see on the outside, it's inside. And on Sukkot, that intensity comes out in the form of joy, which is called L'Yom Chagein. And this is the way the Rebbe is going to answer his three questions about the Sukkah and the Lulav and the Tzara Be'emes Abrius by going back and analyzing all of Tishrei, and basically is a big bad word, dividing it up into two units: the Bakesa of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, says Mitzvah and Yom Kippur, and the Yom Chageinu of Dalad Yom Ben Yom Kippurim LeSukkos, and then Sukkos, and then Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah, and V'yankav Halach L'Darki. And the Rebbe says Yom Chageinu Koyal Chag HaSukkos Muvah B'Kama Mekemis. Yom Chageinu, the day which is Hashem's Chag, goes on Sukkos, like it's explained in so many places. And what's the Pshat Bakesa Yom Chageinu Shakolo and Yonim? All those things. I'm on page Lamed Beis, the second paragraph, the third line. That were concealed and hidden. Not that were hidden, we didn't have them. They were hidden, you didn't see them on the outside. Inside the person there's fire, there's depth, there's pneumius, but you don't see it on the outside. And then Sukkot is revealed, you see it in the form of Simcha. Of course, the day of maximum concealment, even more than Yom Kippur, is Rosh Hashanah. Because Sha'alav Neme Bakes. Rosh Hashanah is the day of concealment, because physically that's when there is no moon. Miloshan L'Yem HaKeseh Yavi L'Beisa, the day of the new moon, day of concealment. Whether it says in the Pasuk, Tiku B'chei de Shefa, Tiku B'chei de Shefa, that you blow Shefa when it's Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, Bakesa, that even though in the beginning of the month it's concealed, L'Yem Chageinu Sukkot is going to be revealed, but in Rosh Hashanah it's concealed. And of course, Mizgalim B'Sukkot. And now that Rebbe brings one of his favorite ideas, right? There's so many ideas for each moyed, but one of the things that the Rebbe brings is the inyan from Didan Notzach. When Rosh Hashanah comes, then of course there's a judgment, and then there is a psak, and then there is a chasima, and all the other things. You don't know whether we came out in Zakai or the opposite of Zakai, Rachman al-Islam. However, Yisrael Yeitzim B'Lulvei invest again b'Yodam, when the Yidden walk out holding the lulav and esrig, Anan Yadid. We know now the Yisrael Inu Nitzechaya that the Jews were victorious Rosh Hashanah before, like the famous mashal of an army that goes out to fight a war, and when they win, they make a parade. So you know they were victorious when they march through the streets in a parade. Already on Rosh Hashanah the victory happened, even though in the Gemara they speak about La'alter and Toiled, that by Tzadikim and by Rishoyim the judgment is La'alter, but by Beinyanim it waits till Yom Kippur. The Rebbe says from Rosh Hashanah it's already been determined. It says in Medrash, of course this Medrash we know the Rebbe always brings it in the name of the Torah. What kind of nation is this? Or what nation can compare to this nation? They know the character, they know the tendency of their master. Yisrael Yedim Yidden know before Rosh Hashanah. Shakadosh Baruch Hu Yasal Nes. Hashem is going to perform a miracle. V'yisku bedin, and they're going to be meritorious in their judgment. V'harayah, they come to show Rosh Hashanah dressed in big day Shabbos rather than in levushim shchayrim in black clothes, and they call it Yom Tov. Rosh Hashanah is called Yom Tov. Yom Kippur is called Yom. But Rosh Hashanah all over the city is called Yom Tov. Says the Rebbe Kain Davar Pashat Hu. Now we're on top of page Lamed Gimel. It's obvious. Rosh Hashanah Hoyolem Ksiva V'Chasim Teva, already on Rosh Hashanah. Not only we were written for a good year, but we were sealed for a good year. Nevertheless, you don't see it. Tachlis Hakavona V'Ashleim was the ultimate intent and wholeness, perfection and peacefulness. Is Shanitzoch in Zeh Yeh Begiloi, that you should be able to see that the Yidden have been victorious in the judgment. This doesn't happen until Sukkot, as the pasuk says, Bakeseh, everything which is covered over Layem Chagein Shanitzochen Shaya Bakeseh B'Rosh Hashanah. And of course, when you say Rosh Hashanah, you really include Yom Kippur, as you're going to see soon. Nimshach B'Gola Layem Chagein was revealed Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and the Rebbe says Bo Matachas Hashleimas, and only when it's manifest and revealed, then it's perfect, then it's complete. When it's Beruchnis, it's nice, but it's not nice enough. When it's Begashmias, that's the Davar Shalom. And the Rebbe now says, what about Yom Kippur? And I want you to know, one of the reasons that this Maamar excited me so much is because there's so much detail about Yom Kippur. I should really say that differently. Not so much detail, but there's so much talk about Yom Kippur. Because Yom Kippur is an orphan. Because the Rebbeim almost never said Chassidus Yom Kippur. There's so much Chassidus from the Rebbe, from all the Rebbeim. The Rebbe said one Maamar, Beneget Yom Kippur, Matzah Yom Kippurim, Tafshin Chav Gimel, I think. But otherwise, there's no Maimarim of Yom Kippur. But the Maimarim of Rosh Hashanah have to explain Yom Kippur. How Yom Kippur is the same thing as Rosh Hashanah, it's the Pnimius of Rosh Hashanah, and so on. This Maamar gives a lot of Yom Kippur. And that's what's going to happen now in Perek Hey. In other words, before we learned that in order to answer the questions about the Sukkah and the Lulav and the Tzara Ben Asabriyas, you have to understand the Bekesa, the Yom Chagenu of Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. And now the Rebbe says, and don't forget about Yom Kippur. Here we go. Perek Hey. We know that Yom Kippur is also called Rosh Hashanah in the Pasuk in Yecheskel, like it says in the Likutei Torah. Now the way it breaks down in terms of chronology, Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei. And first comes Rosh Hashanah, then comes Yom Kippur. But they're both called one contiguous Rosh Hashanah. And like it's brought in Kabbalah, that Rosh Hashanah is called Binyan HaMalchus, and Aseret Yimei Tshuva is the Binyan of Malchus in all 10 Sfiras. Malchus Shebe Chochma becomes Chochma Shebe Malchus, Malchus Shebe Bina becomes Bina Shebe Malchus, until Malchus Shebe Chochma becomes Chochma, Malchus Shebe Chochma becomes Malchus Shebe Malchus. That's how it works. And it goes on the 10 days. So when even though we talk about making Hashem a king, Rosh Hashanah, it's Rosh Hashanah as well as Yom Kippur. You say to me that it's not only Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it's also the Aseret Yimei Tshuva. Omer Razal says in the Gemara, Elu Asara Yamam Shbein, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, because in the whole unit of 10 days, which is including and in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, of course, you know the Rebbe's famous Vart. Asara Yamam Shbein, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur means that there's 13 days. First, you have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Then you have 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then you have Yom Kippur. The first 2 days are also Rosh Hashanah, and the last day is also Yom Kippur, because there's 2 in Yom Rosh Hashanah. First, Rosh Hashanah. Second, how Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of Aseret Yimei Tshuva. Third, how Yom Kippur is the last of the Aseret Yimei Tshuva. And fourth, the day of Yom Kippur itself. And this entire unit is included in this theme of Reish Hashanah. This entire unit is included in this theme, which is called Bakesed, hidden, still concealed. Says the Rebbe, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim, Nechlolim, Beis Seres Yomim, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur don't only have the same name; they're part of the same unit of 10 days. Omizeh, move on page Lamed Gimel, middle paragraph, 7th line, beginning. This explains to us that there's something very special which is brought forward. That on the one hand, Hashayach Lam Shachar Rosh Hashanah, it's connected to what happens at Rosh Hashanah. On the other hand, it's different than Rosh Hashanah. It's 2 different days. What's going to be the difference between Rosh Hashanah being Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur being Rosh Hashanah? So the Rebbe explains Va'inyanu. Says in Chassidus, the Yom Kippurim Mam Shachar the B'chinas Neshama Pnimius. Everything that happens in Rosh Hashanah is on a level which is called Makiv, and on Yom Kippur it's on a level which is called Neshama Pnimius, soul and inwardliness. It's revealed by Pnimius. I'm going to read and translate, and then I'm going to try and explain it. Whereas at Yom Kippur takes whatever Rosh Hashanah is and internalize it in the way of Pnimius, and what happens at Rosh Hashanah? We make Hashem a king in the way of Bakesed. And Yom Kippur, this making Hashem a king Bakesed is an Inyan Pnimi, moving it's understood, Shagam B'chol, Shad HaInyanim, and everything that happens in Rosh Hashanah. And each of the Seres Yemei Tshuva, Ha'amshacha B'Yom Kippurim B'Chenes Pnimis. Yom Kippur is the culmination of all the Seres Yemei Tshuva, and all the Seres Yemei Tshuva we do very lofty things, and Yom Kippur, all of these lofty things achieve a station which is called Pnimius. Now let's pause, let's explain this. Now, I must be candid and say that I don't know what it means. I'm just going to tell you what I think. I've never seen a Hezbollah Chassidus. Like I said before, there's not as much Yom Kippur as there is Rosh Hashanah. In Likutei Torah, you have a lot of Yom Kippur. You see, when you have an energy that's bigger than you, it's overwhelming, right? It blows your mind, right? It's unbelievable. So the power of that energy is very strong. The effect that power has on the person is equally very, very strong. But it essentially pushes the person aside. You and this energy are incompatible, so that energy is so strong, it pushes you aside. And in the language of the Maamar of Ata Tetzaveh, it's K'meidava Neisev Akeirchas HaGiluim. It's outside of your person, or your personage. Now imagine 2 opposites. That you have an incredibly powerful energy which should push you aside, and it doesn't. It fuses with you. And again, in the Lashon of the Maamar of Ata Tetzaveh, it's that Etzem HaNeshama Kifishu Meshreshes B'Ha'atzmos, that's Chadim Keichas HaGiluim. And that's Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is very deep. Yom Kippur is all of that depth in a way that the person becomes one with it. So in Rosh Hashanah, Hashem, we make him a king through crying, Min HaMeitzar, and blowing shofar. And he agrees to become a king, and there's a revelation of HaMelech HaKadosh, Atzmos Amhus, as the Eibush reveals of his Melech Al-Kol Ha'elam Kulei, and especially Melech Al-Yisrael. And on Yom Kippur, we're sort of Kalim for it. The infinity of Rosh Hashanah on Rosh Hashanah is Makiv, and the infinity of Rosh Hashanah on Yom Kippur is Pnimius. But one thing they share. That's it. That's my whole hezbollah. I have no more words. I don't have any more words. It's self-explanatory that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are Yechida days. Their inyan is Yechida. The Yechida Gil of Rosh Hashanah is a Makiv. The Yechida Gil of Yom Kippur is a Pnimi. However, they both share the following. I'm reading on Omnam. However, I'm on page Lamed Gimel, middle paragraph, 5 lines from the end. Gam hamshach azu shebei Yom Kippurim. Even if it's true that Yom Kippur is Pnimius compared to Rosh Hashanah, it's much deeper than Rosh Hashanah. But Adayin be'efen de bakeseh, it's concealed. You don't see it. Inside, there's, like the expression is kaltenbrand, hot ice. The fire of Yechida is experienced inside the person, but you don't see it outside the person, and you certainly don't see it in his life. When do you see the Didan Notzach, that Yidden were victorious in their judgment, and that you see revealed the union of Yechid in the life of a person? To the extent that you can actually celebrate with an overt joy, is B'yem Chagenu Chag HaSukkos Dafke. It will be on Sukkot, which is the 50th day of the month when the moon is full. So there's a difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the aspects of the Bakeseh. The Rosh Hashanah it's Makiv, the Seres Yemei Tshuva it's Makiv, Yom Kippur it's Pnimius. But they're the same in terms of the basic idea that the Yom HaNeroim is called Bakesser. You're deeply involved with Hashem. But that depth of involvement with Hashem is not seen in the outer aspects of the person, in the eating and the sleeping and the drinking and the working. It's only inside. Sukkot, it comes down to all aspects of the person's life. Achilose and Shtiyose and Teyule and Malbushe and the rest. Begile. So the Rebbe now says, if you will, we started off the Maimed talking about Sukkos, Dalet Minim, and Avodah. In order to explain Sukkos, Dalet Minim, and Avodah, we went back to talk about Rosh Hashanah, Aseres Yemei Teshuvah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkos. And we established that Aseres Yemei Teshuvah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is Bakeseh, and Sukkos is L'Yom Chagenu B'His Galus. So the Rebbe says, and there are many aspects of the Bakeseh that are themselves revealed in the B'Yom Chagenu. That's what's going to happen now in Perek Vav. Of course, this is again all the V'kocha. The V'kocha makes all of these correlations, this chain. There's a connection between the shofar and Sukkot, and you'll see inside it's a connection between the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, the anan haktedos of Yom Kippur, the cloud of vapor, the smoke of Yom Kippur, and the schach of the sukkah, which is brought into Pnimius with the lulav. It's known, and you see in footnote 29, he's mitzayin to the Mishnah Chassidim and the Pri Etz Chaim, and also to the V'kocha. Sheschach, that the roof of the sukkah, which is called schach, and the Rebbe says in the bracket, Pashat l'halocha nigle, that the schach is the whole sukkah. Now the Chazal discussed, if you make a sukkah, ha'isas tukasei, without a kavanah for a mitzvah. So the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. According to Beis Shammai, if it's within 30 days of Sukkot, it's kosher. If it's beyond 30 days, it's not kosher because you didn't have kavanah for the mitzvah. According to Beis Hillel, it's always kosher. Why? Because a sukkah has one criteria, that you made it for shade. Let's say. According to Beis Hillel, making it for shade is automatically a sukkah. And Beis Shammai says, tzeil is not enough, it has to be tzeil shel mitzvah. But the schach is not an aspect of the sukkah, it's really the whole sukkah. The whole sukkah is the schach. Even though you can't have a sukkah without walls, but the sukkah is the schach. And the Rebbe says schach, last words on the pages, begematrim is samach is 60, and chaf is 20, and 20 is 100. And of course it corresponds 60 tkiyas, and 20 shvarim, and 20 truas. That's how it's explained. Keneged meya koilus, it corresponds to the 100 sounds, the shofar, top of page Lamed Daled now, shenogu yisol etkea bereish Hashanah, that's a Jewish custom to blow Rosh Hashanah. Now the reason the Rebbe says the Lashon shenogu, because mederaisa you have to blow only 9 koilus. 6 tkiyas and 3 truas. The shas, what's a trua, whether it's a shvarim, or it's a trua, or it's a shvarim, trua together. That's how you get to 30, and then you have the shaila before davening, in davening, and chazaras hashatz, that's how you get to 90. Leave it to Jews, you end up with 130. Fatama Davar is the reason is Le'yev Kanal. Le'yev Shenyan Asukanim Shadet Kia Shefa. Since whatever Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is in a way of Helam, Bakesser, is revealed on Sukkot, so the different mitzvahs and the different pnimis they kenyan associated with this time of year traverse through the Yom Tevim. The Tkiyas of Rosh Hashanah and the Ananakov of Yom Kippur and the Schach of the Sukkah and the Lulav, which brings it into pnimius, are one long story. Because it's one idea, and if I may use words, it's called Yechidah, or Achas. That's what Amaim is about, how the Achas is brought into Oshan on Rosh Hashanah, how the Achas is brought into Oshan on Yom Kippur, how the Achas is brought into Oshan on Sukkot, how the Achas is brought into Oshan in the Dalet Minim, and so on and so forth. The reason is, whereas the Sukkah is the same thing as the Rosh Hashanah, and the Tkiyas of Rosh Hashanah, therefore there's a parallel, there's a connection between the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah and the Schach of Sukkah. But on Rosh Hashanah you blow 100 sounds and everything is deep, quiet, inward. It's revealed, everybody can see it. It's the roof of the Sukkah. This is called Helam and this is called Gilui, but otherwise they're the same thing. The 100, the Yechidah, the Achas. And the Rebbe continues, Yom Kippur is the same thing. So this connection between Schach and the Yud Kuf Kels of Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe brings as his makir the Mishnah's Chassidim. Yeah? The connection between Kippur and Sukkot, there's no makir in the Maimer, and the makir is about Shem Tov. I don't know why he doesn't bring it. Al derech lo gam negeli Yom Kippurim ki du shachach sukkah du with an gam negeli Yom Kippurim ki du shachach sukkah du with an Yaakov. This chach of the sukkah is reminiscent of the clouds of glory. And there brings the bracket in the Gemara. There's two opinions why we sit in the sukkah, but the halach is we sit in the sukkah because the Yidden had clouds of glory in the midbar. So Rabbi Shem Tov said, the sukkah is reminiscent of clouds. The smoke of the incense burnt in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippurim is called a cloud. So Rabbi Shem Tov says the cloud which would fill the whole room of the Holy of Holies becomes the cloud of the sukkah that envelops us. So the Rebbe says you see a connection between Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, and you see a connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkot as well. Because they're the same basic theme. They're all achas, they're all yechida. The difference is only that Rosh Hashanah says Mitzvah and Yom Kippur. It's in a madrega which is called Ba'keser, and in Sukkot it's a madrega which is called L'Yom Chagenu. Says the Rebbe, Bir in the Pshat Hazoy, the Metchila Ba'am Shachad Rosh Hashanah. First of all, you have Rosh Hashanah, you blow shofar, you make Hashem into a king, you reveal Yechida, but it's in Makif. And then it comes B'Pchinas Pnimius B'Yom Kippurim, Kippur, this idea becomes one with the person. And then he continues, Vam Shachad Zusha B'Yom Kippurim. And on Yom Kippur, this happened to Inyan HaKtedes, which is the concept of Ktedes, Rimen, or Tzarach Liz V'Kis, and then HaKtedes is HaKapedes. That the incense made smoke, which covered the Kapedes, which the Kohen Gadol brought on Yom Tiv and Yom Kippur, or Beklolos Yesod was that Klolos Havezi B'Kippurim Kohen Gadol, B'Yom Kippurim B'Kedesh HaKadoshim. The Rebbe is sort of setting up what we're going to be learning tomorrow morning about Elam Shana Nefesh, the Kohen Gadol, on the whole of Yom Kippur, the whole of the Holy of Holies, is doing many services, many things. But it really comes down to the Keteris of Yom Kippur, as the Rebbe is going to say later in the Maamar. From the cloud of the smoke, of the incense which was burnt in Yom Kippur, in the Holy of Holies, it comes down to the Chachasukkah, Shasoki Hashem, and then Yaakov. So this is an Onon, and this is an Onon, this is Bakes, and this is the Yom Chagin. In short, says the Rebbe, Tishrei is a continuum. Rosh Hashanah, Seres Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippurim, Sukkot. And the ideas are the same. The difference is that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, although one is Makef, one is Pnimis, it's called Ba'keser, and in Sukkot it's the Yom Chagin. Our shir is now over. It took us an hour, 50 minutes, 55 minutes. We basically learned the questions, and we basically set up the concept that the Rebbe wants to pursue. Tomorrow morning, Be'erech 10:30, maybe a little bit later, because I may need a little more preparation time, we're going to learn the next 4 pages. That means the bottom of Lamed Daled, Lamed Hey, Lamed Vav, Lamed Zayin, and much of Lamed Ches. And that's really the heart of the Maamar. It's the most difficult part of the Maamar. There's a lot there. And the Nekuda is that there's Olam, Shona, Nefesh, as it relates to Rosh Hashanah, especially as it relates to Yom Kippur, and also as it relates to Sukkot, and then you bring in the Achas into the Oshan, Ukaloshan HaYadua, Ukafi Sheyazbai LaKamagid, who was the second of the Alter Rebbe's 3 Rebbes, into the yard site of the Rebbe Maharash, who was the middle of the 7 Rebbeim of Chabad, whose yard site is Yud Gimel Tishrei, which is tonight and tomorrow. And the Rebbe mentioned that the Tzemach Tzedek and the Rebbe Maharash have the same yard site, as the Pasuk says, Echad be'echad Yigoshu. The Rebbe Maharash yard site is Echad be'echad. The 13, Echad is Aleph Chezdal, is 13 of the first month, namely Tishrei. And the Tzemach Tzedek is Echad be'echad, the 13th of the first month, Nisan. And the Rebbe said, why is it that the Rebbe Maharash is Echad be'echad, Yud Gimel Tishrei? And the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, is Echad be'echad, Yud Gimel Nisan, because the Inyan of Tzemach Tzedek was Tzadik, which is Nisan, and the Inyan of the Rebbe Maharash was Tshuva, or Baal Tshuva, which is Tishrei. And I'll see you in the morning. Thank you for coming and listening and learning, and I hope